The early morning haze clung to the windows at lax like a tired veil, muting the outside world in soft gray light. Inside the terminal, the rhythm of travel moved as always, rolling suitcases. Murmured announcements, the quiet shuffle of early flights. People moved like clockwork, sleep still clinging to their eyes, coffee cups in hand, scanning departure boards without really seeing them. Keanu Reeves walked among them, unnoticed at first. He wore worn jeans and a black hoodie pulled low over his brow. A canvas bag hung from one shoulder, scuffed and faded with time. There was no entourage, no assistant, no one trailing him or blocking cameras. He was just another travelant till someone looked again. "Is that Keanu?" A whisper floated near the check-in desk, hushed and uncertain. Another glance, subtle nod from the man in question. But he kept moving, boots echoing quietly against the polished floor. He didn't draw attention. If anything, he avoided it. He moved with purpose, but never rushed. A rhythm that said he had time for people, not just places. Near gate 76, a young mother crouched beside her bag, a toddler squirming against her hip. She was digging through a cavernous purse, trying to retrieve a boarding pass. The child fussed, kicked, and sent a folded passport skidding across the floor straight toward Keanu's feet. He stepped forward instantly, crouched, and retrieved the passport before it could be trampled. The woman looked up, flustered, brushing her hair from her face. "Oh, thank you." Keanu handed it over with a soft smile. "It's easy to drop things when you're carrying the world," he said gently. She blinked, caught off guard, then smiled back. "Thanks." She didn't say his name, didn't ask for a selfie, just nodded, eyes grateful, and continued juggling her child. Keanu returned to the line, unnoticed again, as if nothing had happened. A small act of kindness folded into the morning, but someone did notice. From behind the tinted glass wall near the crew entry, First Officer Dean Caraway stood, with his arms crossed, his pilot uniform crisp and untouched by the hour. His eyes were locked on Keanu, not in admiration, not even in curiosity, something colder, deeper. He'd seen that face before, more times than he could count, on movie posters, on television, once framed beside a hospital bed where his younger brother lay unconscious. Keanu Reeves, smiling from a motorcycle, frozen in a moment of cinematic cool. It had hung on the wall for a year before the accident, before the call, before the silence that followed. Dean's jaw tensed. He turned away before anyone could read his face. At the boarding gate, Keanu remained near the back of the line, letting others rush ahead. The young mother struggled again with her stroller. He stepped forward, folded it smoothly with a practiced touch. "You've done this before?" she asked, smiling faintly. "Not exactly," he replied. But I've broken enough luggage to figure things out." She laughed under her breath and whispered a final thank you as she moved forward, her child calmer now. The gate agent scanned Keanu's ticket. She paused, eyes catching the name. Then, with a small smile, handed it back. He returned the smile, with a nod, and walked down the jet bridge. Inside the aircraft, the first-class cabin was still empty. Keanu slid into seat 2A, placed his bag under the seat in front of him, and gazed out the window. The tarmac shimmered beneath soft cloud light. He exhaled and closed his eyes. Then footsteps, measured, deliberate. Dean Caraway entered the cabin. As part of pre-flight inspection, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning. He paused at row 2. Just long enough for silence to settle, Keanu opened his eyes. Their gazes met. Dean didn't nod, didn't greet him, didn't even acknowledge him. He checked the overhead latch. Moved on without a word. Keanu watched him go, a flicker of understanding crossing his face. Not confusion, not offense, just awareness. Something was off. From the front, flight attendant Maria caught the exchange. She noticed the tension, the lack of greeting. Her brows furrowed slightly. Keanu offered her a polite smile as if to say, "It's fine." But the quiet friction had already taken root. The plane hadn't left the ground, but something in the air had already shifted, and it would not be ignored. The engines hummed quietly as the rest of the passengers began boarding. their footsteps soft against the carpeted jet bridge, their voices low, muffled by the early hour. Somewhere in the flow of boarding announcements and safety checks, something, unspoken, still lingered in the cabin, a cold thread of tension that hadn't come from altitude or weather. It came from the narrow glance that passed between a man in 2A and the pilot who refused to see him. Keanu sat still, out on the tarmac, not fidgeting, not withdrawn, just present. He had learned long ago how to notice the shape of a room without needing to move through it. In this room, this cabin was off balance, not loudly, not obviously, but enough to tighten the air like the sky before a storm, behind the curtain. Just feet away, First Officer Dean Carraway stood alone in the galley. Hands braced on the edge of the counter, eyes locked on the stainless steel wall in front of him. He had walked the aisle. He had seen him. It was like staring into the ghost of a scar he never learned how to cover. Captain Julia Chen stood at the flight deck reviewing the manifest, flipping pages, not yet noticing the coiled energy tightening. Her co-pilot's frame. "Passenger count holds," she said over her shoulder. "Gate crew says we're on time." "Good," Dean answered, voice clipped. It was the kind of tone that held the weight of something else, something more than fatigue.
"You all right?"
she asked, not looking back. "Just didn't sleep." She let it pass for now in first class. The young mother from earlier passed Keanu again, her toddler now half asleep on her shoulder. She caught his eye and whispered, "Thank you again," a softness in her tone that reminded him why he kept showing up for people in small ways. He nodded gently, barely speaking, and gave her more room as she moved down the aisle. His body was still, but his mind was drawing lines, tracing that pilot's silence. Clipped breath, the gaze that felt like accusation and memory all at once. Maria. The senior flight attendant passed by and paused at his seat. "Still." "Water, sir?" "That'd be perfect," he said. "Thank you." She handed him the glass carefully, her expression kind but observant. She had noticed. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was a quiet code between people who saw too much and said too little. As she walked away, Keanu closed his eyes. It's not to sleep, to center, to breathe, to prepare for something he couldn't name but knew was already in motion. Behind the curtain, Dean was staring at the cockpit door again. His mind drifted to a hospital room. 10 years earlier, his brother Kyle, 17, a wild spirit with a beat-up motorcycle and a love for all things fast. The walls of his bedroom were lined with Keanu Reeves posters, most of them from movies where the man never wore a helmet. He'd study them like scripture, mimic the lean of the bike, smirk on the face, the way the jacket flared in the wind. And then, one rainy night on a back road in Colorado, a sharp turn, a missed curve, a crash that shattered more than a machine. Dean had flown to the hospital from Atlanta. Kyle was already gone, and all he remembered, etched like a scar into his memory, was the nurse removing Kyle's helmet. Same replica from The Devil's Ride, film he'd watched a dozen times. Dean had never watched another movie with Keanu Reeves in it after that, not once. And now, here he was. Seat to a dot, quiet, courteous, kind, like nothing ever happened. Like the man in the posters hadn't left shadows in people's lives. Dean didn't know what he wanted from him. Maybe nothing. Maybe an apology he couldn't say. Maybe a fight, but what? He didn't expect. What he never saw coming was that Keanu would sense all of it without needing to be told. As the plane pulled from the gate, the seatbelt sign chimed, and overhead bins clicked shut. Maria passed once more, offering a quiet smile to the passengers. She paused at Keanu's row. "We're ready for takeoff. We'll be above the clouds in about 15. Keanu nodded, eyes closed now. The hum of engines deepened. The world tilted gently. Then came the moment. Dean stepped out of the cockpit again, not with a checklist, not for inspection, but with something unsettled in his stride. His eyes scanned first class like he was looking for turbulence. Inside the cabin, not outside. And when he passed Keanu's seat again, he didn't look away this time. He stared hard. Keanu opened his eyes, sensing it. They held the gaze for just a second too long, enough to break the stillness in the room. Maria saw it. Ashley saw it. A businessman in row 3 turned slightly, pretending to reach for his tablet, but watching the moment unfold like a match being held too close to a fuse. Then Dean turned sharp and vanished behind the curtain. Keanu looked down at his hands. He knew, this wasn't just tension. This was something deeper, and it wasn't finished, not by a long shot. The aircraft leveled at 38,000 feet, humming steadily as it glided above a sheet of clouds that looked soft from the window but masked turbulence not in the air but in the hearts of two men sitting just feet apart. Keanu Reeves remained still in seat 2A, watching the clouds drift like whispered memories. He hadn't opened a book, hadn't taken out a screen. He didn't need distraction, he needed awareness. And something inside him told him this wasn't over. Hadn't even started? Behind the closed cockpit door, Dean Carraway sat rigid in his seat. Hands firm on the controls, eyes forward, but mind nowhere near the Pacific skies. He was flying on muscle memory. Every dial, every altitude adjustment was familiar terrain. But his soul was off course, veering into storm clouds he hadn't flown through in a decade. "You all right?" Captain Julia Chen asked, not with curiosity but caution. She had flown enough years to recognize the sound of a man suppressing something dangerous. "Fine," Dean replied, voice tighter than the seatbelt across his chest. But when he reached for the throttle, his fingers twitched. Julia said nothing. Not yet. Meanwhile, Maria pushed her cart gently through first class. Her movements graceful, composed, but beneath her calm exterior, she was watching every passenger, every shift in body language. Her eyes darted toward 2A again. Keanu hadn't flinched since takeoff. Even when a jolt of turbulence shook the overhead bins, he barely moved. But Maria could see the energy in him, focused, grounded, waiting. Ashley passed him with a fresh napkin and asked if he needed anything else. "Just the quiet," he said softly, with a gentle smile. But quiet was the one thing this flight would not keep. 20 minutes later, a low alert tone sounded in the cockpit. Nothing serious, just a developing weather pattern ahead. Light chop expected. The captain made a calm announcement over the intercom, her voice smooth. But back in the cabin, the tension was already building for other reasons. A man in row 4 angled his phone slightly, pretending to scroll. But his camera was recording. Ever since boarding, he'd noticed the unusual glances between the pilot and the man in 2A, and when Dean had walked by earlier, his expression hadn't just been cold, it had been personal. Now he wanted to see if it escalated. He didn't have to wait long. Dean stepped out from behind the curtain again. But this time, he didn't walk slowly. His steps were sharp, full of purpose. The cabin fell into an unnatural hush. Dean walked up to Keanu's seat and stopped 2 feet away. Passengers turned, confused. Keanu looked up, expression calm. "You know," Dean began, his voice louder, "than necessary, I always wondered what it must be like for celebrities who get to walk around pretending to be saints." A woman in business class looked up from her magazine. The man in the back slowly pulled out his earbuds. Keanu blinked. Once, "Excuse me? You heard me?" Dean said. A few airport gestures, a smile to a camera, and suddenly the world forgets what kind of myth you built. Maria appeared from the galley, frozen mid-step. "Dean," she said quietly, "what are you doing?" He didn't look at her, didn't blink. Keanu sat straighter, not defensive, just awake. "If I've done something to offend you, I'd rather talk about it, not perform it." Dean laughed under his breath, bitter. "Talk, what would you say? Sorry my movies turned your brother into a ghost." That silenced the cabin. Ashley dropped the tray she was carrying. A cup of soda hit the floor with a muted splash. Keanu didn't move, but Maria stepped forward. "You need to come with me." Now, Dean turned his head slightly, just enough. To acknowledge her? Not yet. Then he looked back at Keanu. "My brother thought you were invincible. He saved for years to buy that same bike. Watched your movies like sermons. Thought the road was freedom." Keanu's breath caught, but his eyes didn't waver. Hit a guardrail at 60, Dean continued. "Died instantly. And I got to tell my parents their son was chasing a lie." "You're a lie," The woman in row 5 whispered, "Jesus Christ." Keanu's voice, when it came, was soft. "I'm sorry, I didn't know." "But he didn't die because of me." "No," Dean snapped.
What?
"Then why did he dress like you?" "Like you, quote you like scripture?" "He wanted to be you." Keanu slowly stood, rising only so their eye lines met. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gesture. He simply said, "Maybe he didn't want to be me. Maybe he wanted to feel something he thought I understood." Dean's jaw clenched. Keanu's next words were quieter than ever. "I've lost people too. Friends. A daughter. A brother. The road didn't take them. Life did. And the only thing I've tried to do since is not let grief become cruelty." That stopped Dean. Not fully, but something in him shifted. His breath caught in his throat. The cabin was silent, passengers frozen. Ashley had tears in her eyes and didn't know why. Finally, Maria stepped between them. "That's enough," she said. Dean hesitated, then nodded once. Without another word, he turned and walked back toward the cockpit. As he vanished behind the curtain, tension in the room remained, but something else had entered it. Truth. Keanu sat back down, folded his hands, and stared at the carpet. Maria came to his side. "Are you okay?" He nodded. But Maria didn't move. "He's not," Keanu said softly. She frowned. "You mean Dean?" Keanu looked toward the cockpit door. "He's not angry at me," he said. "He's drowning. I think I just became the only surface he could reach." Maria stood near the curtain, separating first class from the cockpit, her body still, her thoughts racing. Moments ago, Dean Carraway had publicly lashed out at a man revered around the world for his humility, and that man had responded with grace, not fury. But Maria knew enough about pressure to see the deeper fracture forming. This wasn't over, not for Dean, and not for Keanu. She turned back toward seat to a Keanu sat in stillness, his hands folded, his face unreadable. Not cold, not hurt, but deep in thought, like a man who had walked through a memory no one else could see. The passengers around him had gone silent, unsure of how to respond. Some whispered behind hands, others just stared forward, afraid to break whatever quiet spell had just descended on the cabin. Then Ashley approached, her voice low, careful. "He's never acted like that before," she whispered, placing a new cup of tea on Keanu's tray table. I'm sorry." Keanu looked up. His voice was gentle. "It's not your fault." She hesitated. I think he really lost someone." "So did I," he said. Ashley blinked, then nodded and backed away, giving him space. Maria returned moments later. This time she crouched beside Keanu's seat, so their conversation would not carry. "There's something you should know," she said quietly. He looked at her, his gaze soft but steady. "Dean's younger brother," she said. "His name was Mark. He died 10 years ago in a motorcycle accident, and he was obsessed with you." Keanu's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes stilled. "He had posters of you," Maria continued. "Watched every movie, wore a helmet that matched one of your films. Saved up to buy the same model you rode." Keanu exhaled slowly. Maria added, "When he died, Dean blamed the image. The way you rode, it's the freedom it symbolized." He never said it directly, but everyone knew. He shut down for months, stopped flying. When he came back, he was different. Harder, colder. Keanu nodded slowly, not as a gesture of agreement, but as a sign of understanding. Still, carrying it, Maria sat back on her heels. "I've never seen him lose control like that." "He didn't lose control," Keanu said. He lost the silence. She didn't reply. But her eyes said everything. "Do you think he ever talked to anyone about it?" Keanu asked. "Not once," Maria said. "He won't even let people mention his brother's name in the break room." Keanu reached into his jacket and pulled out a small notebook, the leather cracked and familiar. He opened it to a fresh page and stared at the blank space. "What are you going to do?" Maria asked. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he wrote. The pen moved slowly across the page. The hum of the engine softened into background noise as the ink formed sentences that didn't defend. Didn't accuse just reach dear Dean? I never knew your brother, but I know loss. It lives in silence. It lives in the weight we carry. For too long, hoping it will become lighter without ever setting it down. If he looked up to me, I wish I had known. I would have told him what no movie ever can, that nothing we ride or wear or chase on a screen will make us invincible. But I also understand why he chased it, because sometimes when life hurts too much, the road is the only place we feel free. I don't pretend to know your pain, and I won't meet it with anger. I'll meet it with what I've learned the hard way. Sometimes forgiveness is the only way we learn how to breathe again. If this letter helps you carry even 1 ounce less, then it's done what it's meant to do. Keanu folded the note carefully and handed it to Maria. Can you give this to him? Quietly, when the time's right. Maria took it like it was made of glass. Yes. In the cockpit, Julia glanced sideways at Dean, who sat silent beside her. He didn't file a report, she said softly. He could have, but he didn't. Dean didn't answer. He just stared ahead. I've known you a long time, she continued, and I've seen you handle emergencies with nerves of steel. But that, back there, that wasn't professional. That was personal and dangerous. Dean's hands tensed on the controls. You've got to make peace with whatever that was, she said, before you put this crew in the middle of it. Again, he didn't respond. Not out of defiance. Out of shame. Behind them, Maria slipped into the cockpit and placed the folded note on the ledge beside the throttle. It's from seat 2A, she whispered. He didn't say much, just asked me to pass it along. She left without another word. Dean stared at the envelope. He didn't open it, not yet. But he didn't move it either. In first class, Keanu sat back in his seat, breathing through the ache in his chest. The ache wasn't from Dean. It wasn't from the confrontation. It was from the familiar silence that followed loss because he had lived there. To outside the aircraft, the sky stretched in every direction like a sea of light and vapor. But inside, the cabin felt suspended, not just above ground, but above something heavier. The passengers remained quiet. They could feel it. They just didn't know what it was yet. The wheels touched down on the tarmac with a smooth, deliberate grace. But inside the cockpit, Dean Carraway felt no such smoothness in his chest. As the aircraft rolled toward the gate, his fingers clenched the throttle just a little too tightly. Every click of the braking system felt like a memory being dragged across his bones. Julia handled the radio calls while Dean sat mostly silent, nodding mechanically. His mind not on taxiway instructions, but on the folded note sitting just inches from his hand, the note from seat to a dot from Keanu Reeves. He hadn't opened it yet. Not because he didn't care, because he already knew it would change something. And change terrified him more than a cockpit fire or an engine failure ever could. Behind him, the crew began moving through the cabin, prepping for arrival. Passengers stirred, phones powered on, and the atmosphere returned to its usual shuffle and breathe. Rhythm, except in first class, Keanu stayed in his seat, unmoving. Even as others rose to retrieve bags or check their connections, his eyes were on the window. Watching the workers on the tarmac guide the plane in with glowing orange sticks like ghostly traffic guards in the early morning light, Maria approached quietly. "You're welcome to deplane now," she said softly. Keanu gave a small nod but didn't stand. "You waiting for someone?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "No, just a moment." She left him alone, sensing something deeper moving through him. In the cockpit, Julia looked over once more. "You've read it yet?" Dean said nothing. "Do you want me to leave?" Long pause. Then, "No." Julia gave him space, folding her arms as she leaned back. Dean took the note, opened it, read. His breath caught at the third line. By the fifth, his shoulders slumped. By the end, his hands trembled, not from shame, from release, from the quiet realization that he'd been gripping something dead for too long. He didn't speak, didn't explain, just tucked the note carefully into his flight bag, zipped it shut, and finally stood in the jet bridge. Passengers filed out. Dean waited, And when the last person stepped into the terminal, he left the cockpit and walked into the cabin. Keanu stood in the aisle, ready to go. They locked eyes for a beat. Neither moved. Then Dean said quietly, "Can we talk?" Maria froze near the door. Ashley, overhearing it, gripped the edge of the galley wall. Keanu nodded. They moved to the now empty row 6, sat facing each other across the aisle. Dean exhaled. "Hated you," he said without flinching. "I blamed you for something I didn't understand." Keanu didn't interrupt. "My brother," Dean said, voice cracking just slightly, "was everything to me. He was reckless. Yeah, he was young. But he had a light in him I never did. And when he died, I needed someone to hold responsible. You were easy, everywhere, smiling, riding, surviving." He laughed bitterly. "You survived. He didn't." Let the words hang there, then said, "I survived a lot of things. Not all of them visible. Some of the ones I survived I would have traded places for in a second." Dean stared at him. "What do you mean?" "A daughter," Keanu said. Simply. "Leukemia and other things, people. Grief. It doesn't care if you're famous or forgotten. It just waits until you're quiet enough to hear it breathing." Dean's throat tightened. He looked away. "I'm sorry about Mark," Keanu said. "I truly am." Dean blinked hard, a tear forming he hadn't invited. "He rode because he wanted to feel something," Keanu said. "Not because I told him to. Maybe because the world didn't feel safe, and riding made it feel like he had some control." Dean nodded slowly, his chest shaking once. Keanu reached into his jacket and pulled out a small rusted key. It looked old, scratched, but cared for. "This was my first motorcycle key," he said. "I've carried it for years, not as a reminder of machines, but of moments. The wind in your face. The silence under a sky too big to name." He held it out. Dean stared. "Give it to him," Keanu said softly. "I can't, but you can." Dean took it with both hands, like it was something holy. "Thank you," he whispered. Keanu stood, placed a hand gently on Dean's shoulder, then turned and walked toward the exit. Outside the airport, the sky was beginning to break into soft gold. A new day rising. Dean didn't move for a long time. 2 weeks later, on a hill outside Denver, Dean walked alone toward a simple headstone that read, "Mark Andrew Carraway, 1894 to 2013 free, forever." He knelt down, pulled the key from his coat, and placed it on the stone. "He forgave me," Dean whispered.
"So I guess I'll try."
He stayed until the wind rose around him that night. Dean wrote an email to Keanu. It had no subject line, just one sentence. "Let's build something for the ones who still ride." The warehouse was nothing special. It's just an old rust-stained hangar on the edge of Santa Clarita. It's tucked behind a shuttered body shop and a junkyard full of forgotten chrome. From the outside, it looked like a place time had passed over without apology. It's the kind of place people drove by without ever looking twice, but inside, it was becoming something else. A half-built track curved around the perimeter, lined with soft crash barriers and skidder-assistant surfaces. Posters of fallen riders, young, old, reckless, cautious, lined the unfinished walls. Some were in color, some faded by time, but all had names. All had families. On one table sat a row of motorcycle helmets, each painted with personal designs, flames, prayers, quotes. None were for sale. They were part of the curriculum. Stories before speed. In the corner stood Keanu Reeves and Dean Carraway, both in work gloves, both dusted with sawdust and sweat. Staring at the first finished section of the training simulator, neither of them spoke for a long time. Then Dean said, "You think anyone will show?" Keanu glanced toward the door. "They will, not because of us, because of who they've lost." Dean nodded. "I don't know what this is yet. It's not about knowing," Keanu said. "About doing, giving something back, even if it's imperfect." They stood in silence again. In the background, Maria and Ashley moved crates of first aid kits, laminated maps, and stacks of student registration forms. Ashley wore a t-shirt that read, "Ride, Return." Remember, by noon, the parking lot began to fill, not with cameras, not with press, but with parents holding framed photos, with siblings wearing leather jackets that didn't belong to them, or riders who had crashed and lived to walk again. And with those who hadn't, but whose names lived on in the voices of those who came, the event was unannounced. Word had spread through whispers, rider forums, and grief groups. No red carpet, no banners, just open doors and open hands a man. With a prosthetic leg arrived first, helped out of his truck by his teenage daughter. He walked with crutches toward the entrance, pausing at a wall marked in memory of. He placed a photo of a smiling boy, maybe 17. Next to the others, the boy wore a Keanu Reeves movie t-shirt. He always wanted to learn the right way, the man said aloud, to no one in particular. Keanu heard him from across the hangar, but said nothing, simply approached, placed his hand gently on the man's shoulder, and nodded. The man wept without sound. An hour later, they gathered everyone for a short dedication. Dean stood in front of the group. He hadn't spoken publicly since his brother's funeral. His voice cracked before he even started. "My name is Dean Caraway." He began, "I'm a pilot. I used to think that meant control. Discipline, knowing how to steer clear of storms." He paused, swallowed hard. "But grief isn't a storm you fly around. It's one you go through. And sometimes, you take it." Out on the wrong person? He glanced at Keanu, who nodded once. "My brother Mark loved motorcycles. Loved the road. He didn't die because of a movie. He died because he didn't have a place like this. A place that told him how to fall and still walk away. It too. Ride without pretending to be immortal." There were tears in the crowd now, silent ones. This place isn't just about safety. It's about memory, about changing the way we talk about risk. And maybe, just maybe, it's a way for some of us to let go of blame and hold on to love instead. Keanu stepped up beside him, not to take over, but to stand with him. He spoke simply. "When I was younger, I thought speed was freedom. I thought pushing limits meant you were strong. After losing too much, I realized real strength is in knowing when to slow down, when to protect others, and when to forgive." His eyes scanned the crowd. "Some of you came here today with ghosts in your heart. I did too, and maybe we'll carry them forever. But maybe this place gives us a way to carry them differently." With purpose, the crowd clapped, but it wasn't loud. It was reverent. Then, without a microphone, a voice from the back asked, "What's the name of the school?" Keanu turned to Dean. Dean hesitated, then spoke. "The Mark Caraway Rider Awareness Center." The crowd stood still for a beat, then applause. Real, full, tearful applause. The man with the prosthetic leg stepped forward and placed a folded racing jersey at the front. Others followed, helmets, patches, dog tags, love notes, photos. They created a shrine not of grief, but of gratitude. By sundown, the sky over Santa Clarita turned gold. Keanu and Dean sat on the edge of the training track, legs dangling, shoes dusty, watching a small group of teenagers take their first safety course each, wearing a helmet with a photo sticker on the back. "Someone they were riding for," Dean said. "I didn't think I had anything left to give." Keanu replied, "You gave him back." Dean turned to him. Could have walked away after that flight. Never looked back. Keanu looked out at the setting sun. "Some flights aren't about getting somewhere," he said. "They're about bringing someone home." Neither man said anything more. They didn't need to. The world had changed, and no one had posted it online. But it would echo louder than anything viral ever could. The wind picked up in the early hours of the morning, soft and dry, lifting bits of dust from the training track outside the center. Inside the newly built Rider Awareness Facility, Keanu Reeves stood alone beneath a mural in Progressa painted. Road winding through hills, vanishing into a sky filled with names. No faces, no dates, just names. Hundreds of them, each one submitted by a grieving parent, a widow, a best friend, former rival turned advocate. He placed a small frame on the shelf just beneath the mural. It held a photo of a young girl, his daughter. Her smile was missing a front tooth. She wore a plastic tiara and held a crayon like it was a torch. He stepped back and took a breath. This wasn't just about motorcycles, or loss, or even grief. was about legacy, the kind born from pain but shaped by choice. Outside, the parking lot buzzed with quiet energy. Today was the official opening of the Mark Carraway Rider Awareness Center. And unlike the soft gathering weeks earlier, this was now public. No paparazzi had been invited, but word had spread. There were cameras now. A few journalists who had heard whispers of something rare happening in California. Collaboration between a once reclusive actor and a commercial pilot who had vanished from the public eye years ago. A story of confrontation, redemption, and transformation told not with press releases, but with helmets and heartbeats. Dean Carraway paced the side of the track, nodding at volunteers, double-checking signage, occasionally adjusting a rider's posture. He wasn't in uniform, just jeans and a dusty blue polo embroidered with a simple emblem. Ride. Return. Remember, Maria and Ashley manned the front desk. Both wore laminated badges that simply read crew. The term felt right. This wasn't a staff. It was a mission. As the event began, Dean stood behind the podium on a small platform built from repurposed shipping crates. He looked over the crowd, not just of riders, but of people who had lived through something. People who had scars that didn't show on skin. "I want to begin," he said, voice steady, "by telling you what this place is not. It's not a business. It's not a memorial. It's not some vanity project." The crowd leaned in. "It's a promise," Dean said, "that every name on that wall will not vanish, that every family who thought they were alone now knows they're not, and that every rider who steps on this track will leave with something more valuable than speed wisdom." A few in the crowd teared up already. Dean turned slightly, and now, "I'd like to introduce the man who changed my life by not fighting me when I was at my worst." He stepped back. Keanu walked up slowly. No notes. No applause waiting, just presence. He gripped the podium gently and looked out at them. "A lot of people know me because of action films," he began, "because I ride motorcycles in ways that defy gravity. But what they don't see, what none of those stunts ever show, is how many people get left behind when we push too hard. Too fast, without learning the why behind the how." He paused. "I lost people too. And for years I told myself I could carry that alone, but pain is a trickster. It hides as silence, pride, even kindness sometimes. But it grows if you don't speak it." He glanced at Dean. "Oh, this place speaks it." Keanu reached into his pocket and held up a worn leather keychain, the same one he gave to Dean. "This belonged to my first bike, the one I thought would make me invincible. It didn't, but it taught me something I'd forgotten: freedom. Without discipline is just chaos, with better lighting." Some laughed softly. But then came the stillness again. "So ride hard. Ride fast if you must, but ride with remembrance, for the ones who didn't make it, and for the ones who still can." As he stepped down, a line began to form. Not for autographs, 4 stories. One by one, people approached Keanu and Dean, not to idolize, but to share. A mother placed a small toy car in Dean's hand. "He would have loved this place," she whispered. A young woman in motorcycle leathers hugged Keanu without a word, tears falling down her cheek. A veteran handed over a folded patch from his last riding group, asking for it to be placed in the center's shadow box. And then unexpectedly, a teenage boy stepped forward, camera crew behind him. Live stream already rolling. "Keanu," the boy said nervously, "can I ask you something live?" Keanu smiled gently. "Go ahead." "On that flight," the boy said, "you were publicly humiliated, and you responded with silence. With grace. How? Why didn't you just shut it down? Defend yourself. You're Keanu Reeves." The crowd leaned in. Keanu looked at the boy, eyes soft. "Because I saw the pain under the anger," he said. "And I've learned something over the years. When someone screams at you in public, it's almost never about you. It's about what they couldn't scream into the void. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is not return the fire." Hey there, the world doesn't change when we win. It changes when we listen. The camera caught the boys. Eyes widen. The video would later go viral, captioned, "Keanu Reeves teaches the world what real strength looks like." But in that moment, no one thought about clicks or likes or followers. They just stood there in the light of something honest. That evening, as the crowd thinned, Keanu and Dean sat under the twilight sky, backs against the mural wall. Something Guntil. Dean whispered, "It's his birthday tomorrow." Keanu nodded. "Happy birthday, Mark." They clinked water bottles like champagne flutes. Quietly, gently. In the background, the wind shifted. A chime from the corner of the memorial wall rang. Out as the breeze passed through it, soft, like a whisper carried from somewhere unseen. And for the first time in years, Dean smiled without guilt. A few days later, airlines across the country began airing a short documentary called Grace at 30,000 feet, and Keanu never promoted it. He didn't have to, because when a man chooses silence over ego, compassion, over retaliation, healing over hatred, people notice not. It's just in headlines. That's where this story ends. Not with a shout, but with a breath.